Hello and welcome to Star USA Training. Today is Tuesday, December 10, and we're talking about current events, rumors, and forecasting. The webinar is being recorded. Slides, materials, and the recording will all be posted on our website, and we'll send an email to everyone that registered as soon as the recording goes up, so keep an eye out for that sometime next week. There is an NCBFAA code at the end of the webinar, and this session is eligible for 1 continuing education credit. Please make use of the webinar software to submit your questions, and we'll spend some time in the back half to unpack those. We'll also take some as they go if they're relevant to what we're talking about. A word of caution as we start. We are licensed customs brokers, but we are not lawyers, so nothing today should be construed as transacting customs business on your behalf or legal advice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Easton. I am the President and General Manager of Star USA. I also am a licensed customs broker. Joe and I are very happy to be talking to everyone today about these topics, really to help engage the community and make sure that we have an open line of dialogue with us so you can reach out when you have questions. But Star USA was founded almost 30 years ago now as a beacon for people to collaborate, communicate, work together on solving these trade compliance challenges that face international businesses, that face people in the trade community. We are experts in a lot of these trade compliance areas that you have on your screen. And we want to just kind of send a message to the trade community out here today that as the events of the last several years and the next several years start to play out, we want to be part of the conversations. Please feel free to reach out and communicate with us on either the topics that we're talking about today or all of these that you see on your screen right now.
Yeah, trade compliance can feel kind of lonely and isolated, but you're not. It's a really great community out there.
And Joe and I have a lot of experience discussing these things. And to talk Joe up one more time, we have our licensed customs broker exam prep course starting on Thursday, December 19th. That is next week. If you are interested in becoming a licensed customs broker, we've been teaching this course for over 30 years. Joe's been teaching it for a solid 10 at this point. It is a great asset to have in your toolbox if you are in the trade compliance industry, to have a license, get that credibility, get that experience and expertise to know what being a licensed broker is all about. If you are interested in taking our course, there is a $545 discount for people that are viewing this webinar in December of 2024. Just email us at train@starusa.org for that code, and we'll get it to you ASAP.
All right, so we have a poll. This will just help you kind of understand what other people in the trade community are going through, what you are worried about and concerned about, what is top of your mind, and maybe top of the questions and panic that you're getting from other people in your company right now. You don't have to pick just one. You can pick as many as you want. It looks like the majority, 80%, is tariffs. Then after that is FTA, especially USMCA, logistics disruptions, customers and price increases. We just want to reassure you, no matter what you're running into, there are ways to navigate it. Trade has been bonkers before and will be bananas again, but it's a good community, and we are all here to help each other out with facts and options. And we'll talk about some of those today. First topic, we have a bunch of topics today. The first one is continuing education for licensed customs brokers. It goes live January 1, 2025. If you are a licensed customs broker, I hope that you've heard that you're going to require continuing education credits each triennial period to maintain your license. You will be able to start accruing those January 1st, 2025. Since Customs is introducing the program partway through the triennial period, the last one began in February of 2024, they're prorating the required credits. You'll only need to gain 20 credits by January 31, 2027. After that, it's 36 credits every 3 years. Remember that if you receive your license in a triennial period, you don't need to get continuing education credits during that triennial period. Customs figures that if you pass the license exam, you'll be familiar enough with current regulations. Most government events will count as continuing education. Customs conferences, the National Commodity Specialist Division webinars, and many partner government agency events will be available for credits for free. Some of the conferences cost money, but you'll still get the credits there. You need to track your own credits and report them as being achieved. This is in 19 CFR 111-102. It says the individual licensed customs broker must retain the title of the event attended, the name of the provider or host, the dates attended, the number of credits accrued, where the event was, and any documentation that evidences your registration, attendance, completion, or participation. We at STAR made ourselves lovely spreadsheets that we're using to track in-house. It's going to be most likely that this is reported in eCBP, where you submit your triennial information. One nice thing about that is if you work for a large customs brokerage and they pay your triennial fee, you can select that someone else is paying it for you. You just have to put your own information in. If you are somebody who provides training on compliance and customs regulations in-house, you can get credit for preparing and or delivering that training if you register with the accreditor for that. You'll have to pay to get those credits, but it's nice to do if you offer trainings. There are currently 5 accreditors. They can be accessed at the CBP Continuing Education website, linked at the bottom of the screen. Customs is not looking for everybody to report every single one of their events. What they're planning on doing is sometime in Q2 2027, they're going to go to a percentage of brokers to audit their records. So definitely at least this first time, keep all of your records. One nice thing is that our monthly free webinars count as credits. If you attend every one of them, that's 36 credits within 3 years.
Sorry to say, we'll be getting our monthly free webinars accredited. So stick with us and you should be able to cover that gap pretty quickly.
We already have the first quarter accredited, so we are set for 2025.
One of the key developments that we've seen over the last couple of years has been the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2018 and the closing of the loopholes for forced labor goods coming to the U.S. And one of the things that sprang up out of that was the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force, FLETF, and the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, UFLPA. We did a webinar on this back in 2022, I believe. So if you want to go through our webinar archives, please feel free to get a primer on UFLPA. But in a nutshell, goods originating in the Xinjiang region of China are subject to being withheld for reasons of forced labor being used in the manufacture of those goods. And as we've seen UFLPA play out over the last couple of years, there have been a lot of shipments being held. More than 10,000 shipments have been detained since this act went into force, and more than 4,500 have been denied entry into the U.S. In November, the entities list for UFLPA was expanded to include 29 new entities. They update this periodically throughout the course of the year. This year had several additions, but 29 in November was the largest of the year. And CBP also announced that they're going to be using isotopic testing, and there's a fact sheet linked here on this slide. Again, when you get the slides after the webinar, you'll be able to kind of investigate that, or you can Google CBP isotopic testing, looking for basically traceability back to that XUAR region of China to find goods that are being shipped through other countries, but originating in that Xinjiang region. The targeted industries were also expanded in July, and they include electronics, textile and apparel, manufacturing materials, agriculture, automotive, base metals, including aluminum products, consumer products, pharmaceuticals, machinery, PVC products, and seafood as well. So PVC, seafood, and aluminum were added in July. And as we can see from the chart on the right, a lot of the shipments being detained are being routed through other countries besides China. More than $1.56 billion in goods were detained from Malaysia, 1.01 from Vietnam, and $500 million from Thailand, while China was only at 0.4 billion or 400 million. And India also makes the top 5 list there. One of the things I want to call attention to when thinking about the entity list for UFLPA, UFLPA is an import program, and therefore that list of entities does not appear in most restricted party screening software tests that are usually based around export practices. If you're using the consolidated screening list from the BIS, you should note that it does not include the UFLPA directly, the UFLPA entity list. And you should be paying attention to your sourcing and your import supply chain. And it should be noted that it doesn't need to be a direct supplier that's named on the entity list. The expectation is that in no point of your supply chain is forced labor being used. And if you cannot pinpoint who those players are in your supply chain, you may need to be doing additional checks with your supply chain network, making sure that none of those goods are being sourced there. You may also be able to consider doing isotopic testing of your own if you have suspicions. So there are companies out there that will do that sort of testing.
It's not fast though, so start soon if you're going to do that. I have 2 random facts. Can I throw them in?
Please do, yeah.
In the last couple of weeks, Volkswagen sold their factory in China to stop the forced labor allegations and information that finally closed recently. And this week, CBP announced that they are going to seize all imports of aluminum from a China-owned factory in the Dominican Republic because of forced labor findings. So even if it's not from this specific region of the world, they're still looking at forced labor everywhere and cracking down on it.
Yeah, and that really goes to just illustrate how aggressive the U.S. is taking their position on forced labor and preventing those goods from coming to the U.S. It's fueled by other trade policies in global economics, but knowing how your supply chain works has never been more important. And we're seeing that play out every day.
Section 301. In May, the president issued a memo about the USTR review process, telling them to increase rates of duty on battery parts, electric vehicles, vehicle batteries, graphite and other critical minerals, magnets, semiconductors, cranes, solar cells, and steel and aluminum products. We're also increasing on face masks, medical gloves, syringes, and needles. After that, USTR published a report that was a review of the July 6 and August 23rd, 2018 Section 301 actions. And they found that Section 301 was effective in encouraging China to eliminate some of their technology practices, but not many. They found cyber intrusions and cyber theft from China as China's going after foreign technology and trying to acquire it. CrowdStrike, which is a security company, found that China was responsible for 67% of all state-sponsored cyber intrusions in 2020 and 2021. So that's a lot. USTR said economic analysis has shown small negative effects on the U.S. economic welfare, positive impact on U.S. production in the sectors that they were targeting, and not much impact on prices and employment. Most of the negative impact that they saw is found in the retaliatory tariffs that China applied. They also found that it's working, we're buying less from China, and we have diversified our trading partners. So they recommended goods subject to Section 301 duties stay subject, and there are certain areas they recommend increasing or adding Section 301. They got a ton of comments for a government publication, and they evaluated, so it took them a little longer before proceeding. Most of the comments they got were about specific subheadings that were subject to Section 301, but about half of them were on the proposed increases, and some of them were on the proposed exclusions for solar manufacturing equipment. In September of this year, they issued the modification of Section 301, that was USTR. They implemented the increases that the White House requested in their memo, put together an exclusion process for machinery and domestic manufacturing, especially solar manufacturing, and reviewed and talked through the comments that were received. Several comments noted that the electric vehicle increase hits mobility scooters as well, which USTR decided to leave. And they also decided to leave electric motorcycles, bikes, and golf carts out of the tariffs on electric vehicles. U.S. manufacturing of face masks was judged sufficient to address U.S. needs. Medical gloves are going to see a 50% duty in 2025 and 100% duty in 2026. That's done with the goal of increasing U.S. production of nitrile gloves. The specific HTS headings and their increases start on page 37 of the September Notice of Modification when you get the slides. That's how we got here. There is currently one way to apply for a small subset of exclusions, machinery used in domestic manufacturing. That opened October 15th and closes March 31st. As of last week, there were 75 requests. You can, as a person in the United States, respond to those requests. If you're somebody who manufactures that equipment and you want them to buy from you, you can go in and say, hey, we have this stuff. The rest of the Section 301 tariffs just are. You can try contacting your senator, but for the most part, things are going to remain under Section 301, if not increase. There is a court case going that claims the Section 301 tariffs were wrongly implemented. The original court sided with the federal government, but the case has been appealed. Importers can still join the case in the hopes that that case wins on appeal. And if it does, then importers who joined before that are eligible to take part in the refunds. The Trump administration has promised to add 10% on top of the existing and incoming tariffs. We'll talk more about options the company can take, but that's how we got where we are.
Yeah, I'll add some more to this. We're seeing, as a direct result of this May 2024 report, the Section 301 tariffs, the additional tariffs that we're seeing on electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, and more. Not just the U.S., which is bringing in 100% tariff on electric vehicles coming from China, but we're seeing the rest of the world kind of respond in kind. In October, Canada put a 100% surtax on EVs from China. Mexico allowed their 2020 tax exemptions for EV imports from countries without FTAs to lapse. And the EU imposed CVD duties on battery electric vehicles from China for 5 years, ranging up to 35%. So what we're seeing is, for lack of a better term, the West is taking a stance on the electric vehicle market and products associated with that in particular to combat China's growing influence in that market. So we are seeing a lot of these actions being disputed in the World Trade Organization, but that takes years to play out. In the meantime, these supplemental tariffs are in effect, and they are affecting U.S. buyers and manufacturers. In some regards, we're seeing it have potentially the intended effect of effectively nearshoring electric vehicle manufacture, because many of the parts to manufacture an electric vehicle will be subject to the 25% tariffs, while the finished vehicles are going to be subject to 100% tariff. Obviously, the stated intention is to spur U.S. manufacturing and getting more of the U.S. labor involved in the manufacturing of electric vehicles. And it seems to be having the intended effects so far, but it's still very early to tell. These tariffs are relatively new, and companies are reacting to them. A lot of companies on the West Coast and in the Southwest US are dealing with and navigating these additional tariffs. But it is a worldwide concerted effort, it looks to be. Yeah, so 301 is effectively here to stay.
How are you guys handling 301 tariffs? How are your companies dealing with it?
This is a really good question because being as part of the industry, trying to help companies recognize strategies that are effective or that are coming up as recurring ideas just to navigate the landscape. Section 301 was very, very disruptive to standard supply chains when they were first implemented. And it's been 6 years or more since they've been around, and they look to be staying for quite some time and increasing based on what we've seen.
Yeah,
So,
and potentially tariffs on other locations, not just targeting China and their theft of intellectual property.
all reports from the US side have been pretty consistent on the impacts of 301 tariffs and that they have been largely favorable for US economy.
Alternate sourcing and then increasing the cost to your customers is the highest usage, as well as manufacturing site change and maybe some foreign trade zones.
Yeah, and this mirrors a lot of what we've been seeing as well in our conversations. Alternate sourcing is chief in a lot of people's minds, and it is very, very challenging to navigate, especially if you're late to the party. Although we have seen a lot of countries expand their manufacturing capabilities over the last half decade and more, and we expect to see that to continue to increase, particularly in the Southeast Asia region. But African markets are starting to try and get into the fray. Indian subcontinent obviously are making a major play for manufacturing. The adaptability of supply chains is a constant challenge in these zones, but we'll talk a little bit more about some of the options that are on the table and how to navigate those as we move through here.
We got a question on, do you have details regarding dates and how importers can start preparing for exclusions? The only sector that you will have the ability to ask for exclusions on is the domestic manufacturing machinery. Machinery from China that helps US manufacturers make the goods. And that started October 15th, and that exclusion request window will close March 31st, 2025.
If there are additional 301 tariffs or increases on existing 301 thresholds, currently 25% pretty much across the board, with some higher than that. There's talks of that increasing by 10 additional percent. The exclusion process for that is not expected to reopen effectively those same items that had already been discussed.
And that's because they have judged it to be such a success and to be effective. Now, remember that Section 301 is limited in scope. The president is only allowed to implement tariffs under Section 301 for very specific reasons. And just doing a blanket tariff on every country is not one of those.
Yeah. Right now, as far as we know, Section 301 is targeted at China imports. They're using other programs and other mechanisms for things like UFLPA to target Chinese goods moving through other countries, and whether or not that expands to other partners. We'll talk about that in a little bit too.
With this increased scrutiny on trade and your supply chain, one interesting thing that happened this year was that in September, the Department of Justice Criminal Division put out kind of a guideline to prosecutors on what factors to consider when investigating a corporation's compliance program. Now, this is DOJ specifically. It's not BIS, it's not CBP, but I have heard both of those, as well as OFAC and DDTC, mention these parameters. It's important to think about, even if you do not expect your company to have a criminal case brought against them. The three factors, the main questions are, is your program well designed? Does it have resources and empowerment? And once it's put into practice, does it work? They're looking at the program at the time the offense occurred and at the time that the charge happens. They want the message to be, it's never too late to get your house in order. If you had a faulty compliance program and an error happened, did you then put remedial steps in place to ensure that it wouldn't happen again? The DOJ provides really good explanation of the tests and factors in the document. It is a not so short, but still easy to read 25 pages with all the references and footnotes. They're looking at risk assessment, policies and procedures, communication, the ability to do confidential reporting if there are issues. That's one of the things that companies run into as being the most difficult, especially for small to medium-sized businesses. If you have third-party service providers, are you managing them? Are you aware of what they're doing on your behalf? And then when there are mergers and acquisitions, are you considering all of the factors? We have a really good webinar on mergers and acquisitions if you're in that boat.
Okay.
Management commitment. Is your compliance program autonomous and doesn't have the resources? And are people rewarded for doing well and punished for doing poorly in that area?
That design of that compliance program is an essential component that a lot of businesses are beginning to take more and more seriously as they're seeing a lot more enforcement action taking place across the board, imports and exports. If you do not have a resilient and well-designed program, this is absolutely the right time to be evaluating that and bringing something to bear. So I
Yeah.
just want to get that point. Yeah.
Yep. And then once you implement that program, making sure that you are reviewing how it worked, improving as you need to, and if you start to open a can of worms, making sure that you investigate it all of the way. So we got a question that was a follow-up to the Section 301, talking about bringing in parts from China and doing the manufacturing in the US. Maybe I might be misunderstanding the question, but the exclusion is only available for the machinery to do it. For example, if you make solar cells, it wouldn't be the ingredients for the solar cells that you could get an exclusion on. It would be the machinery that actually makes it that you could get an exclusion on. If that's what you're looking into, there is a link on the slides to that docket.
Yeah, and those links will help navigate kind of the shape of the recent changes within 301 and help kind of point in that right direction. But if you get stuck, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to kind of help you understand the landscape there because it can be quite complicated. The 301 exclusion process from earlier in 2020 was a whole thing.
Definitely feel free if you have more complex questions that we can't answer on the webinar to email us. It's hello@starusa.org, and that's in a couple of places.
And absolutely jumping back to this DOJ guidance, it is uncommon, or at least we tend to recommend that people gear their compliance programs towards the BIS guidance for exports, typically CBP's guidance for imports using CTPAT methodology, things like that. But this DOJ guidance has been very effective in getting that attention and awareness from senior leadership. This is one of the hooks that this program has that a lot of the other ones may not. When you hear Department of Justice, ears tend to perk up. So if you're currently in your organization and struggling to get the support that you need, this is a good strategy to use.
Yeah, you can take this to your supervisors and let them know this is how we are judged by the government agencies, and they're pulling back the curtain and letting you see what they count. And having an effective compliance program is one of the biggest mitigating factors when it comes time for penalties and sentencing.
Yeah, and we work with companies to help develop and implement a program that makes sense on a business by business basis to my knowledge, there is not an off-the-shelf manual or program that you can buy that would come anywhere close to satisfying these concerns that DOJ has published here.
Yeah. In addition to Section 301, anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations and orders are not slowing down. There are currently 716 open orders and 112 investigations. You want to stay current on them, especially the investigations, so you can see what might be coming. Solar cells are the most recent order that was put in, coming at the end of November with a 125.37% anti-dumping duty. And the float glass and foreign shrimp products were also added very recently.
I would add that the solar cells, that 125% that you mentioned there, is in addition to the 50% that we were talking about on one of the previous slides.
Yeah, it is a separate type of duty that is being assessed, and it can get ridiculously high. The anti-dumping investigation on aluminum extrusion products and finished heat sinks from multiple countries was canceled, but they kind of said they could reinstate it with slightly different parameters in the next few years. The 2011 orders on aluminum extrusions stands. This most recent investigation was for products that are similar to, but outside of that scope. So they were trying to expand that scope and maybe extend it to other countries. So we can see a lot of protectionism around aluminum extrusions and a lot of investigations. You can also see China is highly targeted in both the orders and the investigations. The next closest to them is India, and Malaysia is up and coming in that.
These are 112 active investigations that could result in countless new orders depending on how it rolls out. That is a significant number of AD/CVD investigations and orders being implemented, and it is becoming increasingly more difficult for companies to navigate anti-dumping and countervailing duties. And knowing when your products are potentially subject to these things, navigating the scopes, going for scope ruling, all of those are challenges that a lot of businesses are facing and require strategy. And which brings us to this slide. You'll hear us say it, we've been saying it for years and we'll continue saying it in the coming years, but being educated is probably your best tool for navigating the trade compliance landscape generally. And that's why STAR puts a heavy emphasis on education. That's why we do these free webinars. We don't want anybody to be caught unawares. We want you to be well equipped and be in a position to succeed at your business. It's never been more important, at least in my 20 years of doing this, to have your head on a swivel when it comes to understanding your own supply chain and all of the pieces within it. The escalating orders, the increasing tariffs, the amount of speculation that's going on. Information is your best tool to combat some of the potential risks that are involved. I would plug that if you do need help researching your circumstances or building out a strategy for your business, definitely do contact us. I'm hitting this a few times on this webinar just because I've spoken with a lot of businesses that their job is to produce and sell their products and are often under-equipped to navigate all of these regulatory changes and the impacts of these second and third order consequences from all these policy changes. So knowing how to find a strategy and make one that works for you, conducting a tariff impact analysis, doing anything of that sort will be a tremendous advantage going forward. It already has been if you've been able to do it previously. On a very big scale, companies should be looking at 4 general considerations when thinking about these tariffs. The first one I would talk about is tariff engineering. It sounds a little fishy, but it is a legal practice where you are manufacturing your goods to minimize the duty and cost footprint by leveraging a variety of global manufacturing strategies, whether that's under manufacturing in a particular country and then having it further manufactured and substantially transformed in a third country before it is shipped to the US in order to mitigate Section 301 duties. That is potentially perfectly viable.
What I'm going to throw an example in there, if that's
Oh,
okay,
please.
because it made me laugh. Converse, if you've ever wondered why Converse have a little bit of felt on their bottom of the sole, that was because they were tariff engineering. They were manufacturing it in a specific way that would allow them to bring them in under slippers instead of footwear, and slippers had a drastically lower duty rate.
Didn't they close that loophole at some point?
They did. They
Okay.
closed it, but they got away with it for a long time and saved a lot of money.
Until they closed the loophole. Yeah, I would supplement this tariff engineering thought by noting that this would not help with the forced labor considerations. This is strictly for duty. If there is forced labor anywhere in the supply chain, regardless of further manufacturing or other strategies, those goods are subject to being withheld, and you'll have to rebut the presumption.
I also really want to emphasize tariff engineering is not picking a different HTS classification for the exact same good. It is just altering the state of the good at the time that it comes into the US.
Yeah, Joe and I are very protective of the term tariff engineering because we've heard a lot of C-suite folks attempt to mishear certain words. Tariff engineering is a great strategy when done correctly. It's potentially illegal if done incorrectly. So,
Yeah, it's fraud if you
yeah,
do it wrong. Yeah. And we don't want you to get in that boat.
no. But recognizing to what degree and how finding out those answers, obviously it's going to be, your supply chain dependent, but there could be advantages to investigating ways to adjust the manufacturing strategies.
And adjusting the state of the good at the time it comes into the US is also something that companies are looking into to impact origin of goods, either at the time that they sell them to their customers by doing more of the manufacturing in the United States, or by saying, we'll only do up to this amount in China, and then we'll move it to India or Mexico to do the next steps, and we'll increase what's done in those third foreign countries in order to change the origin before it comes into the US.
Yep. And there are a lot of perfectly viable strategies. It does require knowing rules in the other countries, but yeah, there's lots of ways to investigate those sorts of things. When it comes to country of origin, we had a question on this earlier. Substantial transformation is still the law of the land when it comes to country of origin. It is not as cut and dry as something like HS classification is, which is already not that cut and dry if you're in this industry. But comparatively, it is much more so. Country of origin is on a case-by-case basis. Different name, character, and use are the standards that they have kind of stuck with, and it has to be evaluated for each circumstance. So if you're not sure how to understand the country of origin of your products, definitely look into the term substantial transformation or reach out to us.
And I'll tell you that substantial transformation means slightly different things to customs and the Court of International Trade. Recently, we've been noticing that customs is emphasizing the substantial transformation of the part of the article that imparts essential character. And the court is really mad at them about that and says, stop talking about essential character. It's not about essential character. It's about substantial transformation, and substantial transformation doesn't include that. If you get an answer from customs that you don't like, you can consider escalating to the court to get an answer that is more friendly under their interpretation.
Yeah, there's a lot of strategies for navigating substantial transformation, for sure. I'm going to pivot into sourcing strategies. This can tie in with tariff engineering in some ways, but it has to do with, again, it requires knowing what your supply chain looks like, what's happening where, and to what degree, but looking at diversifying your suppliers or finding alternate suppliers. It's often smart to begin sourcing some segment of your materials from another completely unrelated supplier in a different country and investigating, evaluating what the cost differential is there, running explorations on landed cost analysis, things like that. Considering nearshoring, which is bringing manufacturing domestically or anywhere within North America, US, Canada, Mexico. although there are some considerations that we'll talk about here in a moment. Looking for domestic suppliers or drop shipping directly to your customers in a third-party country from a manufacturing point of origin outside the US. There are a lot of ways to potentially reduce your overall duty footprint, even if you can't avoid things like Section 301 entirely. You might be able to reduce the impact that you feel in your business by looking into some mix of different sourcing strategies. The caveat that I would give here is that you need to be wary of distributors and trading companies, either from a price gouging perspective or from a deceptive or potentially fraudulent or illegal activities perspective. If you're typically buying from China and then you find a supplier in the US that is giving you the same Chinese goods at a different price point than what you're paying, there's a good chance that that's problematic in several ways. So you have to be diligent about your supply chain, is the point I would make there. The other thing to consider are duty preference programs and recognizing which ones can apply to your circumstances. Things like first sale, foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses, free trade agreements, duty drawback, other exemptions. There's ways to either defer payment of duties or avoid payment of duties entirely using smart strategies and leveraging different resources that may exist in your supply chain that you may have access to already without recognizing, or being able to get some of that duty back through the drawback programs. None of these programs are simple to implement if you are not already participating in them, but they can be done and can be done in a cost-effective way if done smartly. A lot of companies will have access to some of these resources, things like foreign trade zones and bonded warehouses, through some of their supply chain partners. And it requires having a good understanding, again, of your supply chain and how it operates and who the players are and what they're bringing to the table. If you're not actively talking to your freight forwarders and your customs brokers and your highway carriers and your 3PLs, this is a great time to be doing that.
One of the biggest things with these duty preference programs is making sure that your HTS classifications are accurate. All of the tariff engineering, drawback, and FTZs will increase scrutiny on that classification.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I would add here is if you're not going to be using one of these strategies, then you should be considering extra tariffs and fees on imports as they begin to ramp up. We've heard of the incoming administration talking about a 25% tariff on all Canada and Mexico goods. The 25% tariff across the board on all Canada and Mexico goods would be a substantial impact to U.S. economy. Canada and Mexico are our number 1 and 2 for U.S. exports and our number 2 and 3 on U.S. imports, behind only China. A huge portion of those goods are semi-finished goods. And it's been said that an automobile will cross the border 7 or 8 times before it ever hits the showroom floor. I think that's an underestimation in my books, but we've seen the words that the incoming administration will sign all necessary paperwork to impose 25% on all products from Canada and Mexico. We don't know what all products means. We don't know what all means, but there are threats being bandied that would be significant. There are people that are saying that USMCA might prevent that sort of thing, and there are legal opinions that say that there are ways to get around those sorts of things. The consideration here is paying attention and being prepared from your balance sheets, from your profit and loss statements, of what an impact of tariffs might be on your organization. And again, if you don't know what that answer is, there are ways to find out. Like if you don't presently have access to or know how to use your ACE reports, your Automated Commercial Environment, ACE reports, that help you build data-driven models to understand what these impacts would be, now's a good time to start finding out. You can either look up some of our past webinars, send us an email, preferably, so that we can help you kind of navigate that strategy. There are ways to find out closer to concrete answers, and just make sure you're partnering with people in your supply chain.
Yeah, I was going to mention, thank you for bringing up the ACE reports. I was going to mention that about the anti-dumping. If your HTS classification is correct, then it is your ability, that was worded weirdly. Then you can look up that HTS on an ACE report that has anti-dumping information and see what orders are in place and from which countries. So you can use those tools to do some good research. All right, I have one more poll for you. The others were opinion-based. This one has a real answer. I won't judge you if you get it wrong, though. What's the limit, the dollar value limit for a de minimis entry into the US? The majority of you chose $800, which is the correct answer. Way to go. It is $800 per person per day. That's the limit. $2,500, which is the next closest choice, was kind of a trick number that I put in there to be extra mean. That is the value limit for a informal or formal entry. Anything 2,500 or over needs to be done on a formal entry.
2,500 is also the limit threshold for EEI.
EEI lines, yeah. There's some good parity there between agencies. Let's quickly talk about entry type 86, which is also known as Section 321 or the de minimis entry provision. It allows shipments to come into the United States at $800 or less value per person per day to come in duty-free and with less data elements required. So it's an easier entry to file. You don't need to pay duties, and it's all around nice. It was $200, that was the limit, but the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act increased it to $800. There are currently over 1 billion shipments made under this program annually, most of them coming from e-commerce platforms. There's technically a difference between Section 321 and entry type 86. Section 321 is a pilot that accepts advanced data from a small amount of e-commerce supply chain partners using the automated targeting system. Entry type 86 is a test of the de minimis commercial entry process filed in the automated broker interface. The goals of these programs were to process small shipments more quickly while still allowing customs visibility. The data required is a smaller set. Those shipments are exempt from duty, taxes, and fees. That one person can also be a company. It can be multiple shipments as long as they total less than $800. If the aggregate of shipments goes over $800 in a day, you must file a regular entry for all of those. And you're not allowed to split a single order and send it in kind of one day at a time in order to get under the $800 limit. Customs emphasizes that you have the same legal responsibility for supervision and control and reasonable care as with normal entries, and de minimis shipments have all of the same compliance risks. These shipments are kind of targeted right now. They're being discussed in Congress. They're being discussed at the White House level because of mostly illegal drug entry and undervaluing. A September executive order proposed to change the merchandise eligible for Section 321 shipments, saying no merchandise subject to 201, 301, or 232 duties would be able to use that program if the rule is finalized. Currently, merchandise subject to Section 301 accounts for 40% of our imports. That executive order also proposed to add the name of the person or company as a required data element. Now, the notice of proposed rulemaking for that change hasn't been published yet, but that's something that could be coming down as a targeted area.
The commenter mentioned that it's when we say per person, that means company.
I said that person
Okay.
also means company. Yep, you're 100% right. thank you for bringing that up. We have some bonus topics. Michael, you want to take the first one?
We've heard that the Space Command will be moving from Colorado to Alabama based on a prior campaign intention and in contradiction to what the White House said earlier this year, where the home of the Space Force, Space Command would be Colorado going forward. It looks like there's a likelihood that it will be effective on Inauguration Day. The new home will be in Alabama.
One thing really fast on the entry type 86, there is going to start being an alert in ABI that will tell someone when that person or that company has hit $800 a day and formal entry will need to be filed. So that's a nice enforcement provision that's starting to tell you ahead of time instead of punish you after the fact.
Yeah, at least help you not accidentally cross that threshold.
Yeah. And that's especially problematic when you have multiple brokers or many couriers who are making entry at the same time. If you have UPS, DHL, and FedEx entering things for you at the same day, and they don't know what the values the other companies have already entered for you that day, that's problematic.
Or if they're paying attention in the first place, even if there's all
Yeah, they're just trying to file entries as quickly as they can. They're overworked. Kristi Noem has been nominated as the Department of Homeland Security head. One thing is, when I looked into this, there's several agencies under Department of Homeland Security that we might not think about. Usually we think about Customs and Border Protection, but it's also the Coast Guard, the Federal Protective Service, FEMA is under DHS, as well as Immigration and Customs. We know that Kristi Noem is the South Dakota governor, and even though she currently does not have a state on the border, she has very strong positions on immigration. We would expect that resources are diverted that direction, which could lead to an already overburdened customs having even less staffing at area ports, slowing down trade processing.
On the 2026 USMCA renewal, the agreement, when it went into effect, has a 16-year period of being in place with a 6-year renewal period. Basically, after the first 6 years following a renewal or enactment into force, the three countries will come together and decide to renew for another 16 years, or if a decision cannot be made, they will reconvene every year until that 16-year period expires. And if they are unable to renew during that 16 years, then the agreement would expire. So in a nutshell, USMCA is scheduled to be in effect until 2036, but in 2026, the three countries will come to the table and discuss whether or not they want to renew it for 16 years from 2026. There is a lot of volatility around USMCA. I mentioned it previously, and there are a lot of disputes. The countries could decide to terminate USMCA. That would have to go through congressional channels, but expect this to be a common talking point through 2025 and into 2026. The renewal date is July 1st, 2026. We'll see how that plays out over the next 18 months.
In September, maybe, the DoD, the General Services Administration, and NASA published a proposed rule that would update the list of items that are classified as domestically non-available under the Buy American Act, as well as implement changes to getting new items on that list. So when you're a federal contractor or a government agency, you're subject to requirements of buying domestically manufactured goods and supplies. And you're allowed to not do that if you can prove that those goods are not available domestically at the amount that you need. If you are subject to those, this is a good rule to take a look at. The comment period is still open for another 13 days. So you can go in there and make some comments if you want to. They currently have about 15 comments, so not too much. And then there is also a headquarters ruling on substantial transformation that is an interesting read talking about that origin that we discussed. Thank you so much for attending. Here is your NCBFAA CCS credit. This is not yet accredited for customs broker continuing education credits. That will start January 1st, but you can write down this credit and use it for your, I believe, CCS and CES if you are part of those programs. If you have any additional questions that you want to ask, please feel free to do so. There is a question about you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Good.
So the question here is asking about the proposed changes to the rules of origin currently in the Senate, stating that if you are a subsidiary of a Chinese entity, you are subject to Chinese duties. Effectively, what this proposal is talking about is eliminating one of those vectors of tariff engineering that we were just talking about previously. There's no official position that we have from anybody in the administration right now, and I don't think we'll get one for a couple months yet. But there's no practical mechanisms for this to be in place right now. They would have to effectively assess Section 301-like duties to other countries or find another mechanism like the UFLPA to target specific companies operating in or through other companies and countries. So whether or not it can or will be implemented, if it does become implemented, it would remove one of the major tariff engineering vectors that is one of the legal vectors right now. But it's impossible to speculate on whether or how it will be achieved at this time, is what I would say on that. Joe, did you want to throw more on?
Yeah, there are often proposals made in Congress that are made to kind of make your base happy and make people see that you agree with their position, and then they don't really go anywhere. There are also proposals that get kind of shoehorned into a budget bill. I think it's worth keeping an eye on. This is a very broad and maybe a little bit complicated of a proposal, but yeah, keep an eye on it. Thank you all so much for attending. It was great to see all your names, and we really appreciate all your questions, and have a fantastic holiday season.
Thank you, everyone.
Email us if we didn't hit something you wanted to hear about.